Will Robinson here from Robinson's Auto. Welcome back, guys. Today we're going to be kicking off a video series. I think you guys are going to enjoy this one. What I have here is a 5.7 350 small block Chevy. Came out of a 2000 GMC 2500 pickup truck. What we're going to be doing here is tearing it down, refreshing it, doing a little tricks here and there along the way. And then when we're done with the build, we're going to be putting this engine into a S10. The S10 is a 97 with a 4.3 Vortec. And as you notice, this is a Vortec as well. And the main goal in the end is to keep it OBD2 emission compliant. In other words, you'll be able to plug it into the scanner, read all your data, pass emissions with no problem, and keeping the fuel injection. We're going to cross that bridge when we get to it. However, let's do it to it. Alright, let's kick this off by removing the obvious: spark plug wires, distributor, coil, intake, exhaust manifold, EGR tube, and whatnot. I want to point out a few things here that you're going to need while you're at the yard. As you can see, I brought along the harness for the V8 fuel injection. Because as I mentioned, we can reflash the ECM in the S10. The only thing difference is we have to run out the wires from the ECM to this harness, and I'll cover that deeper once we get to it. Alright, let's start tearing it down. Seven-eighths wrench for the EGR tube on the intake manifold. That's one bracket that's retaining the EGR tube. On the exhaust manifold. Next, I'm going to just zip off the water pump on here. Now, there's no rhyme or reason to the order you're pulling this apart. As you can see in the yard, I was having trouble getting the fan clutch off, so I just left it on. Alright, next I'm going to take and pop out the distributor. As you can see, I took and loosened up the hold down bracket. Just like that. Alright, next I'm going to take and zip off the lower intake manifold. Keep this as one assembly. We are going to be going over the whole spider injection and whatnot, so we'll be removing the upper intake from the lower and going over everything. But we're going to do that later on while it's on the bench. We got 8 retaining bolts, 4 back here, 4 in the front. So let's zip them off. They're 1/2 inch. In addition, we have to remove the valve covers to give us enough clearance to remove the intake. And the most common problem with these Vortecs is the lower intake manifold gaskets. And as you can see, this one was on its way to failing. Wasn't much lift left on either side. Now we're going to proceed on to loosening up all the rockers, removing the push rods. Now we're going to proceed on to removing the head bolts. You can see in this lower perimeter and right down the center. All these head bolts are going to be replaced. Alright, once we get all 17 head bolts removed, these cylinder heads are pretty heavy. However, we're going to take and pop it. So we take a pry bar, put it here. I think we're good. Okay, same thing on the left cylinder head. And for the curious minds wondering how do I know the left from the right, it's just as if you're sitting in a vehicle, that's how you determine the left and right side of the engine, like if you're standing behind it. In addition, when you have them off on a bench, these cylinder heads can go either way. However, you can tell by the holes in the front, plus these studs that I left in, even though I'm going to remove these later if I send them to the machine shop or whatnot. You can tell which ones were used, and those are going to be towards the front of the vehicle. So it's pretty self-explanatory. So let's start loosening up the rockets. Next, we're going to take and remove the lifters. In order to do so, we got to remove this retaining girdle. I got a drain pan underneath there because there's a little bit of antifreeze still in the block. Half inch. As you can see, he lacked on some oil changes, evidently. You got these little retainers. I can take and pop out the lifters. I just use a little magnet to help me along. As you can see, these Vortec engines use a roller setup, so as a roller can, roller lifters. Alright, behind the scenes I had my helper cleaning up the parts and laying them out in the same sequence that we pulled them apart. This is an important step if you want to reuse the parts, even though we'll most likely be replacing the push rods. However, we'll check it and we'll determine that later on. However, it's laid out left bank, right bank in the same order as we pulled them. Alright, next we're going to take and remove the harmonic balancer quick. Center bolt. Alright, now for this step you're going to need a harmonic balancer puller. What I do, I just simply reinstall the center bolt. Gives me something to push against. You're going to need longer bolts than the original ones because they're not going to reach, most likely. But if you have a kit, they usually come with bolts. Then you just position it, find out what you need. Just like so. Alright, once you get your puller all set up, remember, keep it square. Just remove it. Alright, that's pretty much the top end. Later on, when I'm ready to strip the complete block, I'll pull out the oil cinders and whatnot. I want to get a look at this bottom end. Kind of curious of what she has in it. Hoping for a 4-bolt main, be a pleasant surprise. But if it's 2-bolt, that's fine as well. This block is a 350 LG 10 100243 880 is the casting number. Looked it up. It's a good block either way, but it's pretty much a coin flip. Could be a 2-bolt, could be a 4-bolt. So we'll be finding out shortly. Now I can get this oil pan off, leaving the oil filter and oil cooler housing on it. However, it's all got to be removed. So I'm going to take and remove it now just to give me more clearance. Oh yeah. This is a must-have tool if you do your own oil changes and whatnot. This is all I use. Now to remove the oil cooler housing, there's 2 cap screws in there, Allen heads, 1/4 inch. In addition, I got to remove this one retainer bolt, looks like a 1/2 inch. Just a plastic mallet. I'll break it loose. Just move that like so. Smart move though. Alright, on the oil pan retaining bolts, as you can see around the perimeter, 1/4 ones are 1/2 inch. And the other remaining ones are 3/8. This one here on this retaining bracket is a 7/16. That's a 3/8. Once you got them all removed, so you have these retaining brackets. Bolt main, baby. Oh yes. That's what I was hoping for, guys. There she be. 4-bolt main. I'm happy. This is great. Makes this build that much better. Next we're going to take and pull the timing cover off. There's 8 bolts around the perimeter. 3/8. Prior to even attempting, I might as well take and remove the oil pan gasket. Okay, the crank index ring should slide right off. Just like so. Now we'll take and remove the 3 1/2 inch retaining bolts from the can. Take and remove the can sprocket just like so. And remove the timing chain assembly. We're going to have to use a puller, pull the gear off the crank. So instead of using the long bolt that we moved from the harmonic balancer and having it way out here, taking a chance of getting too far off center, I found the bolt of the same thread, screwed it in much shorter. If you have a 3-arm puller, it works a lot better. However, for this will be fine. First part's just keeping it center. There she goes. Alright, next while I'm here, I'm going to take and remove the cam. Prior to doing so, we got to remove the cam retainer. It's a T30 Torx. Alright, to make it easier to grab a hold of the cam and remove it, I'm just going to take 2 of the retaining bolts. You gotta do it just one. You want to try to be careful as you can. Okay, to give us a closer look and get us in there a little deeper, I'm going to take and remove this tray. It's got 3 9/16 and 1 5/8 retainer. Alright, if you take notice, the one back retainer that we removed is also the retainer for your oil pump. So being as that's removed, we can take and remove our oil pump. It's also going to have the drive gear that's ran by the distributor. There's some guide pins here that you're going to have to wiggle it off of. I'm going to take and remove the rear main seal. Hindsight, I probably should have took and zipped these bolts out prior to putting on the engine stand. However, it is what it is at this point. There's 3 3/8 retaining bolts. Take a 3/8 wrench. And then this one here takes a 7/16. So let's zip them out. This one uses a stud. Hopefully I got enough clearance. Alright, I don't quite have enough clearance to remove the rear main on this stand. So I'm just going to leave it on the crank. When I remove the crank, I'll remove the rear main. This following step will be removing the bearing caps from the pistons and removing them one at a time. However, prior to doing so, you're going to want to mark all the corresponding caps. Because you don't want to mix these up, because when these were machined and whatnot, they were a set pair. So you're going to want to mark each one. There's a few techniques you can use. You can engrave them, you can stamp them. I stamp them. A lot of people don't like it, but never had a problem. As long as you stamp on the boss, you know, I want to go pounding all over the place. And it's fairly simple. So I have number stamps here. Now starting on this side, your cylinder always towards the front is number 1 through 8. That's it. Help me turn the crank to get to a better position for the other cylinders. You're going to want to temporarily reinstall the harmonic balancer. Just leave it up a little bit. You can't really mix up the front and rear mains, but you can mix up the 3 center ones. So what I'm going to do is not even bother numbering that one. Let's number this one too. 3 and 4. So it doesn't take much. Alright, we're going to start with the number 1. Number 10 cap. Remove the cap. Take a look at there. Alright, I don't see too much wear. That's a fairly clean. That's oil. You see all the babbitt's on the bearing, so it's good. Now, if that was a shiny goldish brass color, then you'd be a little worried. Or if you've seen deep scores, you can also take your fingernail and feel the crank and feel for any ridges. This one feels pretty good. Now we're going to take a pop of piston. Sometimes when you're taking off the retaining caps, you can't quite get them. So what you do then, when your retaining bolts are loose, just take the wooden side of the hammer, leave the nuts on it a little bit, and just give the stud a little tap, and that'll help push down the piston, like you've seen me demonstrate by hand before. Another good practice is to put some rubber hoses over top of these studs to keep them from coming in contact with the crank. I'm just going to be really careful. However, we're going to get it down past the crank. Push it the rest of the way out. Now it's hard to reach down in there far. Are you getting a good shot of down here as well? So what you do, you take the wooden side of the hammer again, put it inside the bearing cap, right where the bearing's at, on the rod, and just help it out. Just like so. I'm just going to mount these back up, keep all the bearings and the caps together, that way when we do our inspection we'll go over everything. So remember 1 to 1. Also, if you look at the bearing cap, you'll see the lock, and the lock, the notch in the rod and the notch on the cap, it always goes lock to lock. Right, here's a good demonstration. It's not one to pop. Wooden side of the hammer. Has some signs of wear, so all in all, not too bad. Alright, that's all I eat. Now let's proceed on to removing the crankshaft. We don't need the harmonic balancer on there any longer. I'm going to start by breaking all the retaining bolts loose on all the bearing caps. They're 5/8. You got 5 bearing caps. Now I haven't broke loose, I'm just going to zip them out. Alright, now that all the retaining bolts are loose and zipped out, just give the mains a little wiggle. I got some fine scoring there, but it's nothing major, and we'll inspect this as we go further. I'm just going to take these 2 outer bolts out for now. If you take note on these main caps, there's a boss, an arrow pointing towards the front of the engine. So that's the same way you're going to reinstall them. But just like I mentioned before, it's going to be lock to lock, regardless of how we look at it. You can use the backside of a hammer if it's got a wooden handle to help you knock them loose. That's probably going to be the hardest one. This one's being a little stubborn. That's going to help vibrate it a little bit. Should remain. Good. Okay, now we're ready to remove the crank. As you remember, we had to leave the rear main on it because I don't have enough clearance back here. The plate removed the rear main seal housing. But a couple things to keep in mind prior to removing it. You're going to want a place to put it because we're going to have to store this for a little bit and decide what we're going to do with it later on. You never want to store a crankshaft laying down. You're going to want to stand it up on end. So you want to find a good place to store it prior to removing it from the block. Alright, let's see if I can maneuver this out. It's got a little weight to it. Okay, to remove the main bearings from the block, just take note of what side the locks are on the bearings. And then we're going to just take and spin them out in that direction. Just like so. This one can be a little tough. Because this bearing sets all your backlash and everything. And we'll go over that further later on. So you can actually get your hands underneath that groove a little bit. Just the outer lip. And spin it out. Alright, now that all the internal components are removed from the engine, we're pretty much ready to finish stripping this block down and get it out to the machine shop. Prior to doing so, you're going to want to pull the motor mounts off, any brackets, oil senders. Pretty much you want to send them a bare block. Because at minimum you want to get this thing cleaned real well. They'll bake it and check all the specs over. I'm going to go over it real quick with you guys, just as a glance over prior to sending it to the machine shop.